Welcome back, and thanks for joining me for the newest bite-sized Bible breakdowns, where we now move into the New Testament writings. The idea that Jesus was born to a virgin is only mentioned in 2 books of the entire New Testament. Not in Mark, not in John, nor in any of the letters of Paul. Only in Matthew and Luke. Chronologically, Paul's letters come first, written around 50 to 60 CE, and Paul says nothing about a virgin birth. He simply describes the ministry of Jesus. Then comes Mark, the earliest gospel, which begins with Jesus as an adult, no nativity, no Bethlehem, no angels, nothing. Then comes John, the last gospel, and once again there is total silence. This is particularly striking because John elevates Jesus to the status of the pre-existent Logos. In the beginning was the Word. For such an important event in the redemption of humanity, it is rather strange that the Jesus is God gospel never mentions the virgin birth. Which leaves us with Matthew and Luke, written around 80 to 90 CE. These are the only 2 sources that describe the virgin birth. But here is where things get interesting, because Matthew and Luke don't just tell the story, they provide entirely different genealogies and timeframes. The key source for the virgin narrative comes from the book of Isaiah, specifically Isaiah 7:14, which refers to a young woman bearing a child. In its original Hebrew context, this was a contemporary sign to a king in the 8th century BCE about the Assyrian threat. However, when the text was later translated into Greek in the Septuagint, the word was rendered as virgin, providing a textual foundation for the later birth narratives. More influences come from yet another 8th century book, Micah. Particularly, Micah 5:2, which identifies Bethlehem as the birthplace of David and from which a messianic leader from the dynasty would be born. Scholars widely recognize that these later chapters of Micah reflect Second Temple era messianic expectations, written after the fall of the dynasty when hopes emerged for a divinely restored Davidic heir. When we turn back to the birth narrative, we immediately run into chronological problems. In Matthew, Jesus is born during the reign of Herod the Great, who died in 4 BCE. In Luke, Jesus is born during the census under Quirinius, Roman governor of Syria, around 6 to 7 CE, a gap of roughly a decade. These events do not overlap historically, meaning both accounts cannot be simultaneously accurate. Luke's census itself raises further historical issues. The census under Quirinius applied only to Syria, and did not extend to Galilee or Judea. Further, there was no empire-wide census, and no requirement for people to travel to ancestral homes. The journey to Bethlehem functioned as a literary device, one designed to place Jesus in the birth city of David to reconcile the passage in Micah 5:2. In that context, the birth narrative became a theological necessity of prophetic alignment. The differences continue in how each gospel describes the family's movements. In Matthew, the family is already associated with Bethlehem, then flees to Egypt to escape Herod's fictitious massacre of the innocents, and later relocates to Nazareth. In Luke, they travel to Bethlehem for the census, presented Jesus at the temple in Jerusalem, and then return peacefully to Nazareth. There is no flight to Egypt, no massacre, and no dramatic escape, just a completely different sequence of events. Scholars have long noted that Matthew's account makes heavy comparisons to Moses and Jesus. For example, the massacre of the innocents matches Pharaoh's orders to kill the Hebrew boys, and Jesus spent 40 days in the desert, with Matthew's compressed genealogy representing approximately 40 generations, discussed next. On the issue of genealogies, both Gospels attempt to trace Jesus back to King David, but they follow completely different branches in the family tree. Matthew traces the line back to Abraham, while Luke goes further. Matthew explicitly structures his genealogy into 3 discrete sets of 14 generations. In Hebrew, David's name has the numerical value of 14, by omitting names as compared to 1 Chronicles 3, to make the genealogy fit. Luke compresses even more dramatically, spanning a further 2,000 years with only 20 names from Abraham to Adam. More bizarrely, despite the separate ancestral lines, both birth narratives converge at one person, Zerubbabel. Inquiring minds might pause to wonder, how could that have possibly happened? Well, that detail has a very real historical rationale for meeting at this particular person. See my podcast with Professor John Collins of Yale for the background. This raises the obvious question that critical thinkers have noted for centuries: if Joseph is not the biological father, his lineage is totally irrelevant anyway. Non sequitur much? It also exposes the ridiculousness of evangelical claims that the Bible is error-free. In the ancient world, miraculous births were not unusual. They were a literary signal, a way of indicating that a person was extraordinary. Kings, emperors, and heroes were often given supernatural origins, as happened with Alexander the Great, centuries before Jesus. In this context, the accounts in Matthew and Luke can be understood as placing Jesus within that broader tradition, while also tying his story to Jewish prophecy and divine purpose. Which raises the central question for this series: are biblical accounts reporting history, or constructing narratives to meet theological and political agendas? I think we know the answer.
Thanks for watching. Please check out the other videos on my channel if history is your thing, and see you next time.